Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Tuesday, August 13th, 2024. Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski will be here in a moment on the FBI and Scott Ritter and on some breaking news in Jerusalem and in Russia. But first, this. You all know that I am a paid spokesperson for Lear Capital, but I'm also a customer, a very satisfied customer. About a year ago, I bought gold, and it's now increased in value 23%. So $100 invested in gold a year ago is now worth $123. If you have $100 in the bank, it still shows $100, but $100 in the bank is now worth 24% less. Inflation has reduced all of your savings, all of your buying power, and mine, by 24%, and gold is largely immune from that. If you want to learn how gold will soon hit $3,200 an ounce, call Lear Capital, 800-511-4620, or go to LearJudgeSnap.com. Get your free gold report. Same experts who predicted the 23% rise that I've enjoyed have predicted this $3,200 an ounce gold. Learn about how to transfer this to an IRA. Protect your savings. 800-511-4620, LearJudgeSnap.com. Tell them the judge sent you. Karen Kwiatkowski, a pleasure, my dear friend. Welcome to the show. You have a fabulous piece at JudgeSnap.com and elsewhere about Scott Ritter and the FBI. The FBI as the deep state of the United States, and I want to talk to you about it. But before we do, just some breaking news on two fronts. First, in Russia, it is being reported by credible sources that Russian surveillance has concluded that the Ukrainian invasion in Kursk was planned and carried out by NATO troops, Estonians, Romanians, Poles, Germans, French, and Americans. And Russian surveillance is reporting that they overheard voices of the troops and they can identify distinctly American accents, and some of them are dead. Does any of this surprise you?
Well, in some ways it does surprise me because it was such a desperate kind of last-ditch effort on the part of the NATO and Ukraine side to kind of bring some attention back to Ukraine and shake loose some aid before we have our election. And so in that respect, I can see why the West, why NATO and the US would be involved in it. But on the other hand, extremely risky. So how are we going to deal with the dead Americans now?
I don't know. What will the American public do? Will Joe Biden and Kamala Harris go to Dover Air Force Base to greet caskets draped in American coffins? Could this, in American flags, could this have happened, Karen, without the president authorizing it? How far up the food chain does something like this go? This is an invasion of Russia, financed by American money, guided by American intelligence, perpetrated in part by American personnel.
Yeah, but I don't have faith that they talked to Biden about this, or at least a Biden that is understanding of anything. I mean, we haven't seen much of that president. It's unclear that we even have a president. So I think you have to go up to where the decision would be made, and it's got to be the neocons. It's got to be Jake Sullivan, Secretary of State, and Secretary of Defense. They have got to be putting the plans together and basically having Biden rubber stamp them. I mean, Biden is not well. We know this. Okay. So this is actually a very dangerous time for our country when we don't even know who are making, the people that are making these decisions. And these decisions are decisions going to war with the nuclear armed state. I mean, that's what you're doing when you invade Russia.
Correct. Can you imagine if a Russian militia out of Mexico invaded El Paso, or crossing the Bering Straits? I don't know what the name of the town is in Alaska, invaded the first town they came to in Alaska, which is probably more likely than the El Paso scenario. But can you imagine what our reaction would be to either of these?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we would. that would be a definite act of war. And I think as all these act of wars, are, the country's population tends to come together in rejecting that. So the fact that we are behaving in this way, understanding just the common sense reaction that Russians will have, that Americans will have, without a president that is cogent, it's insane, is what it is. And I don't know how the rest of the world views our country's decision making, but clearly we do not know who are making these decisions in our government. We do not know. I do think they're consulting with guys like Graham, because Graham was quite excited and quite complimentary about this particular Kursk invasion into Russia.
Colonel Wilkerson, your former colleague, thinks that this probably did not make it either to the Secretary of State or to the president, so they could have some sort of plausible deniability. But obviously somebody in the American hierarchy had to approve this. Intelligence assets were clearly involved. American equipment was clearly involved. Much of the equipment can only be operated by Americans. It's unclear if the human beings whose voices were heard were CIA contractors, military contractors, or active duty military. I just hope it was not the last, because if any of those guys or gals were killed or injured, there'll be quite a hullabaloo back here when that is made known. Switching gears to the other breaking news, and that is this, I don't want to call it an invasion, but this entry into the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, which is preserved exclusively for Islamic worshipers, by Itamar Ben-Gvir, the right-wing member of Prime Minister Netanyahu's cabinet, who's also the head of the Israeli equivalent of the FBI. He was well protected by police. He was protected by the military, and he was supported by a couple of thousand Zionist fundamentalists, I'll call them, who helped him walk into the mosque as an act of extreme provocation. Why do you do things like this?
This is a really hard question for an American to answer. I think most Americans have no idea how the country of Israel operates. We do not understand Zionism. We do not understand the political Zionism of Israel. We don't understand the players. I think one of the biggest things that we miss in America is the sheer contempt that Zionists hold any other people and any other religion, most certainly, obviously, Christianity and Islam. These religions are not equal in their mind to Judaism, even though Judaism is very, in many ways, it's like Protestantism. There are a lot of brands of the study of and the worship of, for Jews. It's very, there's a lot of variety there. But for Zionists, there's one thing, and that is the political state of Israel, dominated, wholly populated by Zionist Jews, and everybody else is secondary. So why they're doing it now, as they're being, is it an act of, you can't beat us up? They are worried that Iran will strike them back. They're certainly not prevailing against Hezbollah. They haven't won against Hamas. So is this kind of a rebellious thing? Or does it signify the sense that that I think many Zionists have, that they must win and that they will win? And when they do, all of the territory, not the 67 borders, but everything that is considered Greater Israel, will come under direct Zionist control, and that all others will not just be subjugated, but will be gone. And I think we've seen that, the idea of how we can make people go away in the behavior we've seen the IDF and the Israeli government vis-a-vis Gaza. They want Gazans dead, and that is very clear. I think it's hard for Americans to understand that.
Well, you're going to hear that articulated. You're going to hear me reading the subtitles of that articulated coming out of the mouth of Mr. Ben-Gvir, who along the path on his way into the mosque stopped to talk in Hebrew to television cameras. Watch him, and here's what he said. Temple Mount on Tisha B'Av. Today we commemorate the destruction of the temple, but we must also honestly acknowledge that there is significant change here regarding the sight of Jews praying. As I said, our policy is to permit prayer, but I'll say something else. We must win this war. We must win, not go to summits in Doha or in Cairo. We must defeat them, bring them to their knees. That's the message. We can defeat Hamas, bring it to its knees. Now, he says this leading a march of a few thousand people, a good number of whom are armed to protect him. He is in the government, into an area that by law, by Israeli law, is preserved exclusively for worshipers of Islam. It's not B-roll, some background roll of him doing it again. If this is the same march that we're looking at now, if this is not provocation, what is?
Yeah, it's provocation, and it's also a demonstration of Jewish, I shouldn't say Jewish, but Zionist fundamentalist contempt for all of their enemies, and their enemies are it's not just Islam, it's Christians, it's people in the U.S. government, it's people like Scott Ritter who report and say and characterize the Zionist government in an accurate way to a large audience. He's an enemy. So we have the Ukrainian kill list, that is funded by the State Department, and it's got a lot of media people. Judge, you're on there. Not so much the kill list, but these are the enemies of the state because they say things that Ukraine doesn't like. I think Zionist Israel operates much the same way. They don't want to hear criticism. They will do what they want in their territory, which they envision as Greater Israel, and they're very aggressive about it. But of course, we've known this. But I think what we're seeing today really is the sheer contempt in which they hold those who disagree with them, those who they perceive as having no value. Certainly, their Islamic neighbors, but also, and I have to keep saying this, the Christians that live in that area as well, because that's a triple holy city. This area is cherished by all the three main religions that are of concern here, and Zionists don't care.
Switching gears to Scott Ritter, you have a great analysis that you wrote. Are you convinced, as I am, and as Scott is, and as many regular viewers of this show are, that Ritter has been targeted by the federal government because he's a pain in the neck to them, because he's, in plain English, speaks truth to power?
Yeah, exactly. He speaks truth to power, and he speaks it to a very great and growing audience. He is very bold, as Ray McGovern says, the bravest guy he's ever seen. You can't get him down. He continues to broadcast and speak the truth. And see, the problem is, it's not just Scott. The truth is catching on. More and more people in this world are starting to say, what's wrong? And they're asking a few questions. And very quickly, they find out that there are truth tellers out there. There is accurate data out there. It doesn't generally come from mainstream media. It doesn't generally come from the governments, but it's out there. And Scott is a very confident and reliable broadcaster of this. So I think they're worried. I think they're concerned. And certainly, Scott, I watched the interview where he explained he thinks primarily this is related to, obviously FARA, because they said it, but relating to Russia. But to me, if you even bring up FARA, what is that, the Foreign Agent Registration Act,
right?
Like, if you bring that up to me right now, or even a year ago or 20 years ago, my major go-to is like, oh, they must be concerned about AIPAC. Because if you bring it up, if you are talking about it, it's a very fine line. You have to be careful because it's not so much Russia, and Scott they have no case against Scott. This is harassment. They want to shut him up. But to use FARA really is alarming because it must be alarming for AIPAC, but also it's something that it gets it out there because, we don't register any of the Israeli funded efforts to manipulate policy and politics in the United States. They are exempt from FARA. And every time, and it's always, certain congressmen are always advocating registering, the political advocates for Israel in our government and having them register as agents, as foreign agents, because they are. And those agencies, AIPAC, for example, and others, are very resistant to that. So the fact that the FBI is using FARA against Ritter should be, I think it's very concerning. And it's not just about silencing Ritter, because obviously they don't like that, but it is bringing that, we may be coming to a precipice or a decision point on, are we going to let Israel run our foreign policy completely and some of our domestic policy, or are we going to register them and recognize the government of Israel as we do every other government, as a country that has its own interests and may be interested in putting its, influencing what we're doing that financially through agents and whatever. So that's what FARA is about, to register. So we know, yeah, it's fine to advocate for your country. We just need to know that that's what you're doing. And we don't know that with Israel. So I thought it was interesting that that's why they went after him, because they have, there's a lot of tricks in the FBI bag. There's a lot of tricks in the Department of Justice. We've seen them use all kinds of things against Trump, for example, just one guy, and they've been very creative about how they've gone after him. And that creativity, of course, could be applied to anybody, and it's certainly being applied to Scott. But in using FARA, I think, I don't know, my reaction is we need to keep a close eye on what this means for our policies and our politicians that are bought and paid for by Israel, which there are many of, because we may be engaging or getting ready to engage in a World War III that's not Eastern Europe this time, but in the Middle East. Why? Right. Because we have no control. We have no president that is anybody can recognize that is making decisions. And we have an overwhelming influence of, I could say Zionist Israel, but let's just say Prime Minister Netanyahu, an overwhelming influence of this guy who could care less about American interests, who only cares, as he should, for Israel's interest. And yet we've got, how many standing ovations did he get? the fourth time that and every time he's addressed our joint session, he gets standing ovations. So
what galled me the most about the standing ovations was the longest one, and it was the one in which he attacks the demonstrators outside the building for exercising their First Amendment rights. That's right. Everybody that's applauding for him has taken the same oath you took when you joined the military, and I took when I became a judge, and they took when they joined the Congress, to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, which includes the First Amendment. Of course, that infuriated me. That lapdog treatment was them trying to curry favor with the person who controls the purse strings that fund their campaigns, rather than them representing the views of the people who voted for them and sent them there. That's the right. Warrant for Ritter's home specified 3 electronic devices, a mobile device and 2 desktops. For that, they sent 40 FBI agents, a SWAT team,
yes,
a bomb squad, and several trucks, which of course they filled with documents and papers going back to his earliest days as a UN weapons inspector in the George W. Bush administration, as if that could have anything whatsoever to do with what they're looking for. They gave him a receipt only for the electronic devices, the items specified in the warrant. They did not give him a receipt for all the other stuff because they didn't know what it was. We have to go through it before we can give you a receipt. No, I want a receipt now. We're not giving you the receipt, Scott.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because the State Department, when they confiscated his passport a couple months ago, also did not give him a receipt, and they knew Correct. What that was. So Correct. I am not sure how Americans are supposed to respond to this, because if they can do that to Scott, and Scott's very public, and he's very brave and bold, and he's a good track record of dealing with government harassment. We don't. Rest of us, many of us don't have that. So is it meant to intimidate all the rest of us? Because they're not intimidating Scott. We know that. But is it meant to send a message to others? Because it looks like it is. And I think we need to start figuring out how we're going to deal with this, because and obviously the first thing is more speech. More people are going to need to just say, we're not.
Well, you write in your piece, it's very interesting that you believe Americans are beginning to understand how Israel was formed and how it operates. And you also write in your piece something that I have long believed, even before I became interested in foreign affairs, starting this podcast 3 years ago, is that the FBI is lazy and complacent when they're pursuing spies and bank robbers. But when the government is the victim, when their pride is harmed, when it's a political opponent they loathe, they're as energetic as can be.
Yeah. Well, I'm just observing the reality when I write that. It's very interesting. We can kind of see in the way that the FBI has conducted itself and over time that we don't need the FBI. The American people don't need the FBI. It has nothing for us. It serves simply the Department of Justice in a very narrow sense, and we don't need them. So that we need to start thinking like that. We need to start being aware of many of these arms of government. Really, we don't need them. Like armed IRS agents. Do we really need armed IRS? No, we don't. The American people do not need that. We do not require that. No one was asking for that. But specifically, the FBI is, I hate to use this term, but jump the shark. I think they're over. Their credibility is extremely low.
For the first 100 years of the country's existence, we didn't even have a Department of Justice. If the government had to sue somebody, they went out and hired a lawyer to do it. And who enforced the laws? Well, we didn't have 5,000 federal criminal laws. We had 2. The other laws were enforced by the states. That was part of Madison's genius, is that the feds would not have a standing army, would not have a police department, and would not be involved in law enforcement. After the Civil War, all of that changed. The Justice Department comes into existence, I think, in 1875 during the presidency of Ulysses S. Grant. And then that's when Congress starts writing laws regulating everything under the sun, from the amount of lobsters you can take out of the sea, to how fast you can drive on a federal highway, to how much alcohol you can have in your blood, to how much lead can be in paint, everything imaginable that they want to regulate. 5,500 federal criminal statutes. I do not believe there's a human being on the planet conversant with all of them.
No, not at all.
The FBI will enforce whatever their bosses tell them to enforce. Ritter actually said, the people that came to my house were zealous, but quiet and professional. I have no beef with them. My beef is with the people who dispatched them to me.
That's right. Yeah, it's a dangerous time for Americans, and I think if anybody follows the news in Great Britain or the UK, crackdowns on speech and social media posts and things like that, it's really nuts over there. And I think the plan or the intention of many is to see that kind of controlling of our speech and our freedom of speech and our freedom of thought and our freedom of communication. They would like to see that here in the United States. So, and it'll come here. It's already starting to come here. So if Americans want a different future, they need to start exercising their liberties, appreciating them, exercising them on a daily basis. And really, if we can do anything, let's look at Scott's attitude and try to emulate that, because he's very brave against the little FBI army that they sent to his house to intimidate him and his family. And he stood up against that. He's standing up against that. And I think that's something we need to, as a good takeaway, in addition to the fact that our rights are being destroyed. But we all have a responsibility to defend those rights. It doesn't matter if we're in the military or not. Every American We have that responsibility, and we need to take it seriously, because certainly the DOJ is taking it seriously. Their agenda is an anti-American agenda, and they are implementing it.
Wow. Oh, Karen Kwiatkowski, no matter what we talk about, it's a pleasure to hear your analysis. I'm actually optimistic for Scott. It's going to, these things don't end overnight. Just going through everything they took is going to take the FBI and the DOJ months, and then they'll decide how they want to pursue the case from there. But you have a great handle on it, my dear friend. Thank you very much for your time and your analysis. As always, we'll look forward to seeing you at your usual time next week. All the best, Karen.
Thanks, Judge. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. And thank you to Colonel Kwiatkowski for that great piece that she has on the FBI as deep state, which you can get at judgesnap.com. 5 o'clock this afternoon, Eastern time, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Will there ever be a Palestine by peaceful means? Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.